Good evening, friends, and welcome to our S.O.S. Stephen on Sunday, our Sense on Sunday, sort of weekly update where we try to encompass local issues important to Ireland and some global affairs, but all in context of the original principle, which is a new understanding, if you like, of the nature of reality, and it provides a lot of the answers to the questions that are troubling us most. Now, seeing as we've already got one person on board, and welcome, I will see as comments come up on the right, anything really important, Mr. Gilchrist, I'm guessing it's a Mr. Greetings all. We'll just as people come on board anyway, you can rewind this and play it back at the end if you wish, of course. But this is a live stream. Adds a little bit of authenticity and excitement, I hope, to the podcast. Well, if that's what you call it these days. But we will be talking later on in the video about the Misha Éireann #2 event that was held in Castlebar yesterday. And I was pleased to see so many stalwarts of the, let's call it the pro-justice community, listening eagerly to some very talented and well-informed and skilled speakers about topics that should concern us all, but are largely being blocked, ignored, and suppressed by the government and the mainstream media. But today, let's see now, we're going to start with the title today is The Shame of Ireland, Why Children Are Their First Targets. And this reflects somewhat on the content that was delivered yesterday at the Misha Éireann, meaning I am Ireland, in Irish, Misha Éireann. And it's a sort of a grassroots initiative that has sprung up in face of blatant abandonment by the Irish authorities of the interests of the Irish nation and the Irish culture in favor of, well, I suppose we could just sum it up by calling it the globalist agenda, okay? Or at least that's our best guess, because they're not broadcasting it. They're just doing things that are directly in opposition to the will of the people and seem to think that they're beyond accountability. But today, the shame of Ireland. Now, on this particular subject, most of you may or may not be aware that a hunger strike or protest has been going on outside the Irish Parliament buildings for, I think this might be the 42nd or 43rd day. Now, 40 days is an awful long time to go without food. Now, the people protesting, and I'll pull them up here for you guys, I'll give you their names in a moment. These are the older people protesting. And they want particular concessions from the government to do with their time spent in the industrial school system. Most people in Ireland will be aware of this. There are a few facts and features that most people are not aware of, however. And to summarize them, what was happening back in the day, the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, was that an Irish child could be taken away from their family, from their whoever was looking after them, and handed over to state care on the say-so, for example, of a priest, all right, and eventually, of course, social workers when they came into the fold. They would then be tried in a local court for the crime of having an unfit parent. Now, ridiculous as that sounds, this is historical fact, friends, okay? Now, what in fact, though, was going on behind the scenes? No doubt there were some cases that required people to be, required children to be removed from their families. Hello, Celia, Sean, we've got to allow for that often these initiatives start off with good intentions, i.e. to help abandoned or abused or starving children, that sort of thing. But what very quickly happened, and those of you who know the themes that I always talk about, it's all about the diabolical constructs and how the worst types of people tend to end up heading these constructs, and they tend to be sociopaths and psychopaths, and as a result, they don't care about people. So you start off with a noble initiative, but as it grows, you bring on board all manner of people that may not share the original founders' ethos and ethics and morality, and instead they're there for the money, basically, And all of a sudden, then the original ethos collapses, and it becomes a diabolical business, no less. Well, this is what happened with the Irish industrial schools, whereby not only were these children taken officially into care by the state, and the state then transferred them over to the care of the religious orders, who had been instrumental in the first case of referring cases of alleged neglect and abuse to the state, to the police, to act. So now you have a situation where these children, and they are children, I'm talking about, anything from infants up to 6 or 7 years old when they're taken into care, sometimes older, but this was largely the case. They have now got criminal convictions. Ludicrous though that actually is. They have criminal convictions. They're now incarcerated in state care under the auspices of the various religious orders. Now, the religious orders in turn were then getting paid half a labourer's wage for every child they had in care. So whatever the average labourer's wage was, half of that was given to them for each child in care. And then on top of that, they were farming the children out to laundries, to hotels, to farms, and they were getting paid again for that labor. So, and the children themselves rarely got what you would call a proper education. They were often violently and sexually abused, certainly emotionally and psychologically abused. We all know the stories. We've all seen the movies. And it was a playground for sadists and perverts, largely. With the occasional, good Christian brother or good nun or whatever it might be, Sisters of Charity, who may have been trying to do his or her best in the circumstances, but nevertheless was required to more or less turn a blind eye to all of the abuses going on around them. Now, I have personal experience of this in as much as I represented an older friend of mine. He's now in his 80s. He was in the industrial school, so I do understand the torture that these people have been going through, not only in the industrial schools, but at the hands of a nefarious Irish state, which frankly couldn't give two hoots about them unless they're causing a fuss or an embarrassment. I think these people have realized that, and as a result, they've gone on this hunger strike. Now, as I understand it, they're allowing themselves water, coffee, and I think it may be some liquids. But they've been sleeping out rough now for over 6 weeks, guys, okay? They're old people. They're not in the bloom of youth anymore. This is a critical stage, and we're going to see what's been happening to them in the last few days. I apologize, by the way, folks, that I didn't get to see you. I was up in Dublin just this last couple of days, but I was attending another event. I had intended to try and come and interview, but maybe I'll do so if the chance arises, if this thing doesn't stop very soon. But anyway, so all these people are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s. If they're lucky, they survive to their 80s. But such is the nature of the way they were horribly treated as children by the institutions and by the state, that many have succumbed to the consequences, substance abuse, no education, couldn't advance, and therefore couldn't avail of the better health systems and all the things that come with, earning a plum wage and things like that. Most of these people did not actually get educated, not in the traditional sense. Some of them can barely read and write. That was the case with my good friend, a very articulate and very intelligent and capable man. But basically, I had to help him, in his 60s and 70s, I had to help him make application to the redress boards to see if he could get some compensation for the vile abuses that were visited upon him as an innocent boy. So, as the heading suggests, why do they come after the children first? Well, we'll move on and just have a little look now at this story. We'll bring up these guys a little bit clearer, all right? three ladies there and a gentleman. I'm sorry, I don't have their names off by heart. We'll get to that in a moment. So what's going on here? So as we say here, the hunger striking industrial school survivors hopeful of a breakthrough after meeting with the Taoiseach. We'll see what and if and what that breakthrough may look like in a moment, but don't hold your breath, folks. As the survivors, so what do they want? The survivors want medical cards and state pensions in acknowledgement of their time in institutions. Personally, I think it's the very least the state could do in between dodging and diving. And what are we talking about when we say the state? Well, this is sort of interesting because, you know, we say, oh, the state did this, the state did that, the state did the other. But it wasn't the state. It was individuals who, under the auspices of the state, made inhumane decisions. These people are civil servants, they're judges, they're clergy, they are child protection officials, and so on and so forth, the courts. So, you know, this is one of the first great lies. We'll blame the state. And then if the state is held responsible, what happens? They take your money and my money, taxpayers' money, to buy off the irritating complainants. They've got no real concern about what they suffered, what they went through. You know, that doesn't register with most of the people in the corridors of power. Most of them, as I said, there's a high percentage of sociopaths, as we'll see in a moment. People on the sociopathic scale, high on the sociopathic scale, do not care about other people. They're incapable to a greater extent of what we would call love, right? So they fill that void with other things: power, prestige, possessions. They become bullies, they become liars, they become tyrants. That's why you have so many, you know, arrogant people in the civil service. When you go to them for help or something and they look down their noses at you as if you're some diseased creature, you know. It all stems from from a mindset which leans towards being abusive to other people, right? And this is the sort of thing that happened. So let's read a little bit more here, guys. Where are we? This one, isn't it? One of the older ladies, Miss Dunleavy Green, I think her name is Mary, I'm not sure, told the Nationalist, "What else can we do? We will sit here and wait until they come back from their midterm break." On the first, and this was written back in October, right? We're now in November, guys. On the 1st of November, we will be on day 44. All right, so it's day 45 today of our hunger strike. We're quite prepared for it. Every time we get a pushback, our spirits get higher. It's the only way to fight the diabolicals, basically, guys. But you go into these battles, I would argue, the same as I was explaining to a couple of my colleagues and friends and associates yesterday who are still mired in battles in the courts. If you start off in the knowledge that they're going to pull every trick in the book to prevent you getting what you're entitled to and to justice, if you start with that mindset, and you also start with the mindset that you are in the superior moral position, not these, like I say, diabolicals, these career liars and moral deviants. No, you're in the superior moral position. Think that, feel it, and act it, and don't let them get away with anything. Now, if you go in with that mindset, then you might come out with a win. And I don't mean necessarily trumpets blaring and the media saying, "Isn't Manning wonderful, he won his case," and all the rest of it. No, not at all. But the win will be that you use the experience to show other people what's really going on behind the scenes. And we're seeing this firsthand, as you'll see in a moment, guys. Okay, we'll continue. The three survivors who are on hunger strike alongside her are Maurice Patton O'Connell, 57, Mary Donovan, 57, and Miriam Moriarty Owen, 68, who were placed as children in the Pembroke Arms Industrial School in Kerry. Just one of many, by the way. I can't remember the figures now. I knew it at one time. But so they hope for the break after what happened. Let's see. Now, RTE actually reported on this on the 1st of October. That's over a month ago, you know. State's treatment of 4 hunger strikers unedifying. Well, that's a very polite way. Unedifying. So it doesn't heap praise on the state, does it? But it doesn't quite take them to task either, does it? Not surprising, given that RTE is funded by taxpayers' money, which are channeled through the government. Yeah. And the second one later, 1 month on, Kerry hunger strikers are not giving up. 3 Kerry survivors of industrial and reformatory schools who are on hunger strike outside the gates of Dáil Éireann have vowed to continue their protest until their demands are met. Is that a wise move? All right. What if their demands are not going to be met? Are we going to see a repeat of what happened with the hunger strikers in the Maze, where they went up against a very arrogant and intransigent Margaret Thatcher and basically said, hey, we want to be treated as political prisoners, and until you do so, we're going on hunger strike. And as I recall, quite a number of them died because the lady was not for turning. There was no empathy in that woman. She would be a classic example of a political sociopath. It was all about power, and it was all about control, and it was all about unyielding and not giving in to the peasantry, which even though arguably these were, combatants or even terrorists, whatever you might say, freedom fighters, or they were going up against the British state, still, they weren't going to get, they were trying to move people to compassion. The only people that were moved to compassion were the ordinary people who wept and cried as Bobby Sands and then one after another, the others melted away and passed away from hunger and starvation because, Margaret Thatcher wasn't going to yield. And I'm afraid to say it looks like we're facing something similar here in Ireland. Now, it said here they're camped outside the Dáil. I believe they're outside the back of the Dáil, which is far more convenient, of course, for the media and for TDs who don't have to face the embarrassment of confronting them. I would say to you guys, if you intend to continue this until your demands are met, I would pronto move your little makeshift campsite right outside the front of the Dáil, or at least as close to public view as possible, in the most prominent place you can. Maybe even on Jim O'Callaghan's lawn. That's what I would do personally. And make sure there's cameras on you all the time so that they can't abuse you. So here they are again, just a snapshot of the internet, friends. I hope I've got decent glass content. Well, they're not too bad. They're only broken on one side. So they were hopeful of a breakthrough with the Taoiseach, and that was 3 days ago. They said, they reported they had a positive meeting with Micheál Martin, and with Helen McEntee. So the Taoiseach, the education minister, that's Helen McEntee, previous minister for justice, were to meet with them. That was 4 days ago, But then we see the woman on hunger strike at the Dáil vows to continue the protest, which is the lady I quoted a moment ago. And there to the right, somewhat ominously, a few days back, mind you, minister, which is Jim O'Callaghan, tells industrial school hunger strikers there's nothing on the table, I believe. Let's look at the next one, okay? Because this is looking ominous, guys. This is what they're there for, friends. The survivors claimed that they were promised Health Amendment Act medical cards and contributory pensions 26 years ago, when then Taoiseach Bertie Ahern issued an apology on behalf of the Irish state, but say they are yet to receive them. Among other things, the medical cards would enable people to receive care at home rather than having to go into a nursing home. Anyone that was institutionalized as a child never wants to end up institutionalized in their old age, said Ms. Dunleavy-Green. All right. And again, I can understand this, guys. The horrors that were visited on these kids. We see overall, you say, oh yeah, but it's not the same anymore. And if they go into care, it's a very different environment. People have learned from their mistake. No, it's not that, guy. It's about power and control. At least at home, they feel they have some control, with a carer coming to visit them or with a relative looking after them. They have some control over their environment, over what happens to them. If they are put in these care homes, hello, Nobby, good to see you again, guys, and Aidan Smith, thank you for the comments. But, they're asking for so little, really. But to go back into an institution, I mean, we saw what happened during the scamdemic, plandemic, call it what we're going to call it. But the as John Waters called it, I think the greatest crime in his book here, I can hardly lift the thing up. Bought it yesterday. I'll talk about that briefly later. The abolition of reality. But the greatest premeditated, orchestrated crime against humanity And there's still people who think that it's okay to just do as you're told, follow what the authorities are telling you, No, people who've been through this experience deserve better than to be returned into an environment where they are subject to the whims of staff and administrators in a facility which may very well have just turned into another business. The more people they can run through it, the more money they make, regardless of how they treat them, that sort of stuff. No, they deserve this concession from the state. But let's just see what has happened to them, shall we? Here's Minister Jim Callaghan, who has been tipped to be probably the next Taoiseach. All right, well, at least he'll be replacing Micheál Martin as the leader of Fianna Fáil. Yeah. In response, Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan said that he would raise the issue with Education Minister Helen McEntee, but said that it was unfair to suggest that the state doesn't step up to these issues. Really? Just another lie in your repertoire, Mr. Callaghan? It's unfair? Is it unfair that they've been kept waiting 26 years for promises made by a previous Taoiseach, Prime Minister? Huh? Is that unfair? And you say, well, what's it got to do with Helen McEntee? She was previously the Minister of Justice. Now she's the Minister of Education. Yes, you see, she takes on a role. You see, she now becomes a Minister of State. And what do they want to do? Protect the system at all costs. Why? Because every time we discover another scandal, another, £50,000, or was it more than that? £350,000 bike shed at the Dáil, we find another county registrar being paid off by the banks to repossess people's homes. Every time whistleblower scandals left, right and centre, politicians filling their pockets with public money, children's hospitals that never seem to get built, and another 25-year wait, not just for what these people have been promised, but with the Judicial Council. Yeah, they were talking and talking and talking about it for 25 years, and when they eventually set it up, it's supposed to be their Judicial Conduct Committee. It's supposed to be there to rein in errant judges. And all they did was staff it with their own buddies, put a top-heavy amount of judges on the panel so they can quash all the decisions that the lay people made, even if the lay people weren't already in the pockets of the state. And then they put a fella called Kevin O'Neill, one of the worst examples of arrogance personified in the civil service, who was previously a senior register up in the Four Courts, and they made him the gatekeeper and the secretary to the Judicial Council. And hey presto, suddenly none of the complaints are actually getting through. It's all the same, guys. We have to wake up and be aware of it. Hello, Tony Lynch. Nice to see you, Tony. Yeah, thank you. I just quickly keep one eye on the comments on the side, and later when we put the video up, we'll try and see if we can get them to run. I'm not quite sure 100% how to do it yet. So back to Mr. O'Callaghan and the question on Google: will the Dáil meet the hunger strikers' demands? During the latest Dáil Leaders' Questions debate, Minister for Justice Jim O'Callaghan said, while he understands the concerns. Yeah, well, we know you're not stupid, Jim. Yeah, but do you get it? No, you don't. There are no plans to meet the demands. And he urged the protesters to end the hunger strike and engage with officials because, frankly, hunger strikers, you're becoming a little bit of a nuisance now, and people are starting to talk about you. And you know what? If one of you does, has the impertinence to actually go off and die or something, well, you know what? That's going to create an inconvenience for us that we're going to have to clean up with our pet media telling stories and, whatever. How we're going to sweep it under the carpet, we don't know. So would you mind just stopping? Because it's becoming an irritation. The answer to that is, I assume they're saying back to him, well, yes, we do mind. Fulfill the promises that were made to us. You're a Minister of State. The state promised us X, Y, and Z 26 years ago. Where is it? Stop, mealy-mouthing. The one thing, as I said to a friend yesterday, the one thing that career politicians are all good at is blather. And usually it's deceitful, meandering, red herring, obfuscative blather that's designed to leave you scratching your head going, did he answer the question or didn't he? And of course, with the compliant media, apart from people like the Irish Inquiry or Gript, Philip Dwyer, people who are willing to stand up and challenge these people in their faces. Apart from that, all of the mainstream media is tame. They know how to behave. It's a cozy little relationship. You play your part, Mr. O'Callaghan. We'll play ours, and we'll pretend that we've just done a public service and provided information to the public. It's all lies, my friends. All lies. It always has been, I'm afraid. Oh, yes. Now, this is a slide that some of you will have seen before. Now, I've pulled this up asking the question, why do they target the children first? Meaning the bad guys, diabolicals and everything. Well, this slide does explain it quite well. And feel free again, guys, even though it says copyright on it, I don't mind anybody using this to spread the word. The more people that hear about this and understand this, the better, okay? But many of you will have seen this before, so I won't over-egg this today, but I'll just explain very briefly. What I've done is I've broken human society down into three general categories. On the left, we have empaths. Now, empaths, very simply, these psychological terms, empathetic people feel for other people, they care for other people, they have a heart, they'll shed a tear at a sad story or a movie, this sort of stuff. And they tend to be the generous types who will go out of their way to help other people. That's empaths, just for the sake of helping other people, right? Not necessarily for reward or anything like that. At the opposite end of the scale, you have the sociopaths and psychopaths. There's a slight difference between the two, but don't worry about it today. Their behaviors are very similar. These people do not care about other people unless they are profiting from that relationship, all right? And then arguably the care involved is more exploitation or predatory in nature, okay? Or, what's the word? Opportunistic in nature, okay? And unfortunately, the sociopaths and then the empaths, right, at opposite ends of the spectrum, the sociopaths, unfortunately, in today's world, and it's taken a while for this to happen and to evolve over the decades, but particularly since the 1960s, after the Second World War, there has been a huge rise in the number and percentage of sociopaths are rising to senior positions of authority and power. Once there, you can be assured, even if the mandate is, well, I'm going to be prime minister to serve the people of this nation, well, if you're a sociopath, you can stuff that and, up your jacksie, basically, because I'm going to look after number one and numbers 2, 3, and 4, all of my buddies, my enablers, the ones that are willing and able to help me keep profiting at the expense of other people. That's what sociopaths are. So the point I want to make here, guys, if you look down here at the bottom left, most children, especially young children, would fit into that category. Because if you notice on the left there, it says uneducated and uninformed children, new to the world, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. Now, some people stay in that childlike state all their life. And as a consequence, they're somewhat vulnerable to the wiles of the sociopaths, the psychopaths, and just anybody. They just remain vulnerable. As you see there, acquiescent, vulnerable, compliant, obedience. But if you're going to control someone, that's the best time to hit them, isn't it? Yeah. So as I'll just pull myself up here for a moment, because this is an interesting point being made, okay? One of the discussions yesterday, the public discussions at the Misha Éireann Festival, revolved around horrific stories of industrial scale pedophilia. Certainly in the UK, we had a retired detective, come and tell us his experiences, and how the whole of the system is a network of obstructions to prevent the public from fully understanding how broad and shocking and horrible a problem this is. But one of the reasons that they target children is because for the psychopath and the sociopath at the top right-hand side of the scale there, as you come down, actively evil people on the top right, as you come down, look, facilitators, enablers, predators, exploiters, manipulators. Well, you know what? It's very hard to be a predator or an exploiter or a manipulator of an able-bodied, intelligent, active empath. because they'll see through it, and they'll call you out on it, and they'll probably physically defend themselves if you try some weird stuff. All right, not so children. Okay, that's one of the reasons why they target them. I'm going to give you another reason afterwards. And unfortunately, the science tells us that children who have been targeted like this, who have been bullied and abused, especially if it's intense, it's sexual and, violent, physically violent and sexual, as someone said yesterday, Suzanne Delaney, rape is the ultimate violence, whether it be heterosexual or homosexual rape, it doesn't really matter. And there's a reason for this. We're going to touch on this in a minute. We're going to go right across the board into another theme, and you'll see how all of this marries up. But these actively evil people, right, they rely on fear and on domination and on lies to try to keep people as much as possible trapped down here at the bottom. The acquiescent, vulnerable, compliant obedience in the middle there, unaware, ignorant, apathetic, unconcerned, all right? And the diagram, I must point this out, guys, this is not an accurate model of the makeup of society with three groups, which group am I in, sort of thing, and where on the scale am I? No. Because, in fact, the sociopaths and psychopaths, and there's different numbers for this, it's anywhere from 2 to 3% up to about 15% in any given chosen community. But if you hone in on the most sociopathic communities, interestingly, CEOs of international organizations is top of the list, and the legal profession is second, which is where we get our judges from. Starting to make sense, right? Okay, guys. Likewise, over on the empathetic end of the scale, the profession that contains the most natural empaths is the caring professions, carers, caregivers. And second to that is nurses and primary school teachers. And interestingly, these are amongst some of the lowest paid occupations in the world today, whereby the CEOs, the judges, the lawyers, the barristers, who are often very high on the sociopathic scale, are the highest paid in the world. Now, isn't that interesting? That tells you something about the flavor of the world that we live in today, guys, all right? And there in the middle, guys, are the apaths. These are the vast bulk, somewhat around 95%, or thereabouts, 95% of the population at any given time in history, who are basically what we somewhat derogatorily refer to as the sheeple, They would just follow orders, will do as they're told. What am I supposed to do here? Yes, sir, no, sir. I was just driving the train to Auschwitz. And in here, believe it or not now, and we'll just pull it up again to make it a bit closer. I'm going to have a go here, and I'm not one really to do this very often, much as I've had my difficulties with the police and the courts over the years. But of late, I've seen several occasions where the Irish police, the Gardaí, have been deployed. And there is an unwarranted amount of violence being visited. And I don't care what your justifications may or may not be for it. You should answer to your consciences, first of all. What you're doing is you're selling your souls to your authorities. And in this case, the authorities are diabolical. There's no two ways about it, guys. You're marching to orders. You're visiting violence on members of the public, unnecessary, unwanted violence. You don't act according to the law. You act according to the orders given to you by often despotic and morally compromised superiors. And as I explained to some friends again yesterday, everybody thinks that, you can join the guards and work your way up to become commissioner if you're a really good guard. Not at all. The highest you can get is inspector. And after that, any other appointments have to be government approved. That's the way the government keeps the police in check, by putting all of their own politically affiliated bodies in the senior positions. And the honest and decent guards, as I've said before as well, you meet a middle-aged guard and he's either a guard or a sergeant. The chances are he's either honest. No, sorry, I did the other way around. He's either stupid, literally hasn't got the brains to think, or honest. That's another reason that he won't get promoted. Okay. So anyway, having said that, I'd like people to think about this. The more of us that understand this, guys, the quicker solutions are going to come together. because it's a bit like, well, not really like a horse race, but what's become apparent to me, and this is where I was really encouraged last night at the Misha Era event, because at last I was standing in a room largely full of people, of 400 or 500 people. I'm guessing about 500 people in the main room. I was standing in a room where, at the very least, almost everybody in that collection was open to asking key questions. Because one of the worst things for me in the past was I felt terribly frustrated. I was starting to understand how the system works. I was getting thrown in jail. I was having, attacks and threats online. People were sent to break my legs. And, look, there was all sorts of shocking, and how they came after the children even worse. And then, of course, my poor wife was moved out of Beaumont Hospital while she was in a comatose state. She should never be moved, just to stop me getting an injunction in the courts to get in to see her during COVID, right? These people have no scruples. She never recovered from that move. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch to say directly they killed her because she suffered a brainstem stroke. That's what put her into the hospital care in the first instance. But she should have stayed in Beaumont. It's a specialist hospital for brain tumor operations and all that. She should have stayed there for weeks until she had recovered sufficiently to be moved. Instead, because I'd gone into the High Court because they were trying to block me out of the COVID legislation, they changed the paperwork, put her in an ambulance half an hour before the court case was due to start, and said, "Oh, Judge, events have overtaken us. Fraud, deception, collusion, conspiracy to pervert justice, you name it, they did it." And the fact that she never recovered, and is arguably directly down to the fact that she was moved when she should have been absolutely rock steady, stable in an environment where she was safe and secure. Anyway, guys, it's not about me today. We'll move on. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this diagram explains the nature of many of these people. Sociopaths and psychopaths who do not care about people. They care about their careers, about the money in their pockets at the end of the week, and about advancing up the so-called career ladder, not knowing what they're doing is hop, skipping, and jumping straight into hell. So, having made that point, let's see what's the next one. Oh, yes. So back we go again. Now, this is a similar slide to a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I think. The question was asked of the United Nations: can a diabolically structured institution do good? And again, guys, I just want you to look at this and just reflect upon it. It's another slide I use quite often. But again, how do you advance? You see up the side of the pyramid there. How do you advance from being an employee, for example, or whatever, to becoming an administrator and eventually the boss? Well, the answer is promotion comes with ambition, greed, and service to the system or the organization. And how do you do that? By stepping on other people, basically, almost always by stepping on other people. Some people do achieve things on merit, of course, and credit to them, but they're not going to be allowed to stay at the top of any given organization if they're not willing to bow to the corrupt agenda. Okay? So I'll leave that one up there for you to look at, guys. It's just a question. If the structure is diabolical, and the point I'm making again is, if you're in an organization, especially a large organization with autocratic structures, would that be the right word? Methodologies. In other words, there's a boss and you're told what to do. You're not asked your moral opinion. You're not asked what your ethical or moral opinion might be. You're basically told to do it. Hi, Susan, too. Yeah. You're basically told what to do. And if you don't do it, you're punished in some form. Either get fired, you don't get promoted, you get vilified, or you might even get targeted, by the system in order to shut you up. All right. So take a bit of time, freeze that, have a look at it. But it's all lies, guys. And again, I say this almost every week now. All right. I'm holding up my smartphone. Here's our next potential government, guys. Why do we need a bunch of clowns, especially a bunch of corrupt, self-serving, narcissistic, egomaniacal, sociopathic clowns, robbing the public to pay their buddies and colleagues in nefarious cabals? Yeah. Why do we need them up there? They say, oh, well, yeah, there was a time, a century ago, where everybody in the country couldn't be consulted on every article of policy, or couldn't be asked to vote on, on bills or proposals. But if you can vote, like I say, if you can vote for X Factor and for the Eurovision Song Contest by just tapping a couple of buttons, how difficult would it be to set up technology to do that? And instead of having a lazy, inept, dysfunctional, corrupt gang of gumbeans up there in the Dáil, yeah, we might still have a president whose functions, could be to protect the Constitution, and he'd have a little, and I do mean little, group or band of officials and lawyers and that to make sure that he was kept properly informed. But whatever administrators we would have up there in the Dáil, as an office building, basically, as opposed to this shabby collection of traitors and ne'er-do-wells, whatever group it would be, all they would have to do is, academics and, even politicians or whatever they would call themselves, administrators, civil servants would make look, I think this would be a good idea if we built a road from point A to point B for this or that, the other reason. Okay, it'll cost us 10 billion though, so we need to consult with the public. Put it up online, put the matter up online, alert the public on the RTE News, the News at 6 or whatever. Oh, the website is now open. You can register your vote on this bypass that's been proposed in Dublin, wherever it is. Get the majority, you go ahead and you do it. What's the problem? Cuts out all of the fluff and the nonsense and the wasted money and the brown envelopes and all of that. It could be done, guys. And I suspect, after hearing, I think it was Eddie Hobbs speaking last night, and he was talking about some new form of political movement. Yes, but it can't ape what we've got here, these diabolical pyramids, guys. This autocratic model does not work. They come to your house promising X, Y, and Z. You vote them in, so you've got democracy for 2 or 3 days if they don't interfere in the ballot boxes, which they do, I'm afraid to say. And then once they're in government, they answer to their autocratic boss in the party, or to the chief whip, or to the Speaker of the House, wherever it might be. Sorry, did I make promises? Yeah, well, you can see the situation I'm in now. I can't fulfill them. I've got to do as I'm told, otherwise they'll kick me out of the party. What's the point, guys? You cannot vote autocrats in. Well, you can, because it's what we're doing, but you cannot then expect them to operate democratically. It's ridiculous. It's literally an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. I don't know if I'm going to have time to get all this done today. And if I don't, guys, I'll do a follow-up, all right? But because I want to explain why they target the children first. I gave you one reason. It's because they're amongst the most vulnerable in society. And sadly, they then often grow up, the abused people, not always, of course, but they often do grow up to become abusers themselves, of themselves and of others. It's a very vicious cycle. We got facts and data on it yesterday. It was really disturbing, Right, on to the next slide. Where are we, guys? I hope you're still with me on this. Oh, yes. I made this point a couple of weeks ago. I'll just read it out, guys. I left it up there. I saw it. Democracy, as is being promoted here, and that was in a particular slide, does not actually exist at all. The best examples we have in functioning reality, which are mostly in the Western world, are mere democratic masks of the diabolical initiatives that drives all of the multinational organizations to operate and integrate essentially as autocratic tyrannies, some more obvious than others. A deliberate, knowing mistruth equates to a lie, right? And that's because the theme of this, I was only the one I'm quoting this week, but I had a series of them a couple of weeks ago, guys. And the whole theme was, and who is the master of lies? You know who. Watch out for, guys. Someone lies to you, they're lining up with the diabolical elites. Be careful. Now, so here we go. This is still on the same theme, and I hope, are we going to have enough time to do this? Well, look, I'll open this theme, I think, guys, and I'll jump forwards. I'll brush over this because we've only got about 15 minutes left, and we'll go then to the Misa Era Festival event, and I want to say a few words about that. But here we go. So this is Gender ideology in the Irish schools, lying to parents, harming. Well, there's the lies again, guys. Why do they lie? Because that's their modus operandi. Everything is a lie. It's a deception. And I advise people to listen to this lady, Jana London. She speaks very well. Irish Children Compromised. She's articulate, knowledgeable, and a determined, decent parent. Well worth listening to. And interestingly, there it's on Eddie Hobbs's YouTube. All right. There, then below, also who had a mention at the Misha Éireann Festival was Enoch Burke. They just happened to come up together on the Google thing, so I put him in there because it was acknowledged that even if some people find their, what would the right word be, evangelical intransigence annoying, as someone said, I think it was Terry McMahon said, or maybe it was John Waters. He said the funny thing is he doesn't care if we like him or not. He cares whether or not he's doing what he believes to be God's will. I applaud them for that, absolutely. Someone said he I think described him as the moral backbone of Ireland? It may not have been backbone, but the implication was that they are setting the moral standards that really we should all be fighting for. 500 days in jail, Enoch Burke, God bless him, and I hope they continue to hold their course because they are a light in a very dark place at the moment. Ireland, I believe, is in a very dark place. So the transgender ideology in Irish schools, what's wrong with that? I mean, we're just teaching kids stuff they're going to eventually find out. What's the problem? And again, it's about the slow erosion of all of the sexual taboos. And there's a reason for this, guys, that goes deeper than you might imagine. It's not just about making it less and less offensive. A lot of behaviors that were once considered would be outlawed in society, having a marital affair or being a homosexual, as was mentioned yesterday by the speakers. And now we're into pedophilia. They're basically, meaning the diabolicals, the cabal, the elites, the ones giving the orders to our politicians to bring in these initiatives, are basically trying to water down the intrinsic spiritual morality of our children whilst they're in their most vulnerable state as children. All right, now why? Now again, I'm going to make a decision here. Do I go with this or do I go with the Misha Éireann, or maybe I can do another one tomorrow with the Misha Éireann, but because that can hold. Now let's go. We'll see what we can get done in the next few minutes, guys. I always ramble on a bit, don't I? Who's that? Tom. Hello, Tom. Nice to see you, Mr. Irish too. Well done. Yeah, I'm just seeing a few names pop up here, and we'll go into Facebook later and explain. Now, this, guys, is I just want you to listen for a minute, okay? The original principle, remember, right? The original principle was how things were in the mythological Garden of Eden, okay? Well, I'll come back to myself for a second because I want to express a couple of things. Now, before the purists come at me and say, that's bloody nonsense, it's all myth, a silly story. Yeah, look, listen, all of that's fine. I'll encapsulate it like this. Look, we've all read fairy stories and mythologies, and a lot of them are, quite fantastic, winged horses and, swords that cut through trees and all this sort of stuff. Look, the Bible deserves a certain amount of criticism for not being literal in the sense, and of course it is literal because it's all words, but if you know what I mean, it's not, it doesn't follow the exacting parameters of scientific study, okay? But what is very interesting, and this was after I concluded, while I was in a seminary of all places, that the Bible was a bag of madness, right? After studying it for about 3 years. I then noticed this symbolism, and it all comes back to this original principle. The symbolism is consistent all the way through, and it then marries up with mythologies, with human history, with science, with nature, and with human development in society. All right, but we won't have time to cover it all today. But I'm making the point today, why do they go after the children first? We'll deal with that today, guys. And if there's anything left over, I'll do it again, maybe tomorrow. if I have not. Oh, not tomorrow. I've got an interview tomorrow. Anyway, soon I'll do a follow-up if we run out of time. But it's important that we cover these topics with some measure of depth and understanding. So what I want you to look at here, very simple. There's triads, things that come in threes. Okay, these are the things that existed in Eden. Okay, and they all align up with this original principle: God, Eve, and Adam. Okay, Eve would be the blue here, and Adam would be the red. Okay. Deity, woman and man, spirit, mind and body, concept, plan and action, the garden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. We'll come to that in a minute. Origin, feminine and masculine, in this order, guys. It has to be in this order. Truth, wisdom and activity. Eternal, internal and external. If you know your Buddhism, guys, you know what that one is. You know, the source, alignment, and connection. Love, beauty, and creativity. Electrons, neutrons, and protons, all of these combined equal the original principle, and about, off the top of my head, about 40 or 50 more such examples in common everyday life and human history, but not today. We're just going to pump on with this now, guys. All right. So those things existed in the Garden of Eden. On the left there is a blue tree of life. I found a blue picture. On the right is the blue tree of knowledge. On the right is the tree of life. They're the two main trees in the Garden of Eden, the special ones. Okay. On the left, you see the triangular images of man and woman, right? They're reflected also in the makeup of the atom, which is a proton and a neutron surrounded by an electron. I've put the colors in there to identify them, you know. Over there on the right is what we call the atomic family. Again, everything aligns with the original principle. A man and a woman bounded by love. Ideally, God's love. Yeah. All right. I hope it all starts to make sense. And again, if you want to see more of this, guys, if you go onto Instagram, I've started putting up some of these slides under my own name. So what was going on in the Garden of Eden? So I just want to make this point, guys. All right. There's a bit of a joke, a risque joke. And I thought to myself, can I do this? Do you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm not a comedian, don't claim to be a comedian, but there's this little joke. And the reason I want to do it is because there's a truism in it that most people don't acknowledge or understand. Okay? It goes something like this. It says, it wasn't an apple that caused all the problems in the Garden of Eden. Oh, no, no. It was Eve's juicy pear. P-E-A-R, of course, before anybody thinks otherwise. All right. I hope that's given a couple of people a little bit of a giggle. But actually, it's extraordinary that it's hinting at an archetypal truth, or at least a theoretical truth that makes complete sense to me in context of this original principle. And I'm going to tell you the story now as we look at this just for a couple of minutes. You see up the top there, it says lust and temptation. There's a clue. Right. First of all, if I tell you that the Adam figure, do you remember he was red? Right. And actually the word Adam means red in Hebrew, interestingly. The Eve figure is blue. Now, the reason for this is because the light spectrum stretches from deep red to deep blue. And this is all about us being children of light. I might have another slide to show you in a moment about that. So we're talking about the light spectrum of which we're all made. God said, let there be light, Big Bang. We've talked about this before. So there are two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life on the left there and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All right. Now, life equates to action, which equates to masculine, which equates to Adam. Wisdom equates to knowledge, which equates to the mind, which equates to the feminine. All right. So now you have a symbolic tree, which equates to Adam, and a symbolic tree that equates to Eve. Now, what we're told is, let's see if we can pop forward here a moment. See if the next one makes any sense, or if I jumped them. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I'll show you this one, guys. Again, we're doing okay. This is the this is the light spectrum at the bottom. You see it, deep reds on the right, 400 nanometers is the size of the wavelengths. Deep reds on the left, 700 nanometers. Now, why is this important? Well, very simply, because I'm arguing that we are literally children of light, in that we're made up of all of the energies of the universe, right? But also spiritually and metaphysically, you might even say, we are the same. And this is what we're trying to return to, that state of light, direct connectedness with the divine that existed in the Garden of Eden. There we are. Let there be light, says God in the Bible, and the Big Bang says science. It's the same thing. And here there's the spirit, the mind, and the body, the white, the blue, and the red, in that order. Deity, feminine, masculine, concept, plan, action, spirit, mind, body, blah, 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 blah. All right? Let's pop back there to Eve and her lusty temptation. So, they're told, we know something went wrong, and it's something to do with a temptation and a serpent and a fruit and all this. What they were told was, you can do anything you want. Now, bear in mind, center bottom there, no pun on the word bottom. At least Danny isn't in the room, or else he'd be giggling away here. But the Bible says they were naked and unashamed in this state of unity with the divine. It didn't bother them, right? Then Eve gets tempted, and she partakes of the fruit via the serpent, and then goes and does the same with Adam, right? Afterwards, they don't cover their mouths because they've eaten an apple, do they? They cover their loins, okay? Their naughty bits. Why would you cover your naughty bits if you've just eaten an apple? Now, the key is looking at the tree of knowledge. What God has said to them is, you can do anything you want, guys. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Now, if I said, as I said to you before, do not partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, just to put it more specifically. Now, if I'm going to tell you that the tree of knowledge is representative of the feminine, of Eve, what fruit, then, would you ascribe to Eve? Catholics amongst us will know our Hail Marys, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Eve's womb. God was saying to them, don't mess with that. And the argument is, some theologians have even said this, there was a yet that is not explicitly implied in the Bible, but they were not to do something for the time being. Why? Until they matured into full, true human beings with the authority of God, they could have then joined and had offspring. But instead, they jumped the gun. Consequently, centuries of, well, we got Cain, the first murderer, arrives in the scene, sets up the first cities, and then we have centuries of poor mating choices, resulting in all of this gender confusion. All right. So another reason, as you saw this there, so here we go. Here again, another similar slide, guys, and I've got one eye on the clock here. We've only got a minute or two left. So origin, Eve, Adam, there they are, picture in the garden. It's a bit redundant, really, because we've talked about this. And here we have the spectrum again, the connection between the original principle, and the idea is this. What I'm suggesting, guys, is that as children, obviously we know what defines a child. Well, they're young, they're physically undeveloped, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and possibly most of all, sexually underdeveloped. If I were the bad guy himself, the method that I would use to try to capture humanity once and for all would be to revisit the sin of the fall on the children over and over and over and over again through this flawed, wokest, loony leftist gender fluidity nonsense. And it is nonsense, guys. If you care to do so, I'm going to have to finish now in a minute, guys, so we'll be leaving it at that for today. That's why I go after the kids. Number one, because they're vulnerable, as we saw in the graph, the chart I did earlier. And number two, because their sexuality, which is not yet developed, is, when it is fulfilled properly, it is the fulfillment of their connection with the divine. Probably no great surprise why, in the moment of ecstasy, sexual ecstasy, many people will cry out, oh my God. Interesting, eh? Think about it, folks. I'll say goodnight for now. We'll cover the Messier thing and the rest of the slides either within a day or two, guys, and I'll put a notice on Facebook. God bless everyone. Lovely to see everyone the other day, and we'll talk to you soon.